she cried. "It's not my fault I fell for your best friend. So I canceled the wedding and vanished. Now he cheated, she's miserable, and her family's begging for my forgiveness." Sometimes the people closest to you become strangers before you even realize they've changed, and looking back, I should have trusted my instincts sooner. I'm Keith, 29, and I work as an electrical systems engineer here in Charlotte, the kind of guy who reads equipment manuals for fun and actually enjoys troubleshooting complex electrical systems. 5 years ago, I met Megan at a trade conference where she was representing her marketing firm, and I was immediately drawn to her energy. She had this magnetic quality that made everyone in the room gravitate toward her, this spontaneous laugh that could light up any conversation, and the way she talked about her work made even the most mundane marketing campaigns sound like creative masterpieces. I thought I'd found my person, someone who balanced my methodical nature with genuine warmth and ambition. I supported her through 3 different layoffs from various marketing firms, watching her bounce back each time with determination that I genuinely admired. When she wanted to get professional certifications to boost her career prospects, I covered the course fees without hesitation, even though it meant postponing my own plans to upgrade my home office setup. When her mother needed emergency surgery last year, I liquidated my entire investment portfolio to help with medical bills because that's what you do for family, and Megan cried with gratitude in my arms that night. I believed we were building something real together, something that would last through whatever challenges life threw at us. Our friend group centered around weekend barbecues at my place, where I'd installed this elaborate outdoor kitchen system that became the perfect gathering spot. That's where I first noticed the shift in Megan's behavior, subtle at first but increasingly obvious as the months passed. Megan started making these pointed comments about Brandon, my best friend since college, who worked as a freelance adventure photographer and lived completely differently than us. While I was grilling burgers and talking about mortgage rates or the new energy-efficient upgrades I was installing, she'd be hanging on every word of Brandon's latest rock climbing expedition or motorcycle road trip through the Blue Ridge Mountains. "Brandon really knows how to embrace life's possibilities," she'd say, looking at him with this expression I used to think she reserved for me, her eyes lighting up in a way that made my stomach drop. Brandon lived paycheck to paycheck, crashing on friends' couches between photography gigs, surviving on ramen noodles and gas station coffee, but Megan began describing his lifestyle as authentic and uncompromising, while mine became predictable and safe. I started noticing how she'd position herself near him during group conversations, how she'd laugh just a little too hard at his stories about sleeping under the stars or capturing sunrise photos from mountain peaks at dawn. The contrast became painfully obvious. I represented security, routine, and planning for the future, while Brandon embodied freedom, creativity, and living in the moment. I told myself I was being paranoid, that supporting friends' dreams was just part of who Megan was, but the way she looked at him told a different story. Deep down, I felt something shifting in the foundation of what we'd built together, like watching a carefully constructed circuit slowly losing power. The woman who used to curl up with me on Sunday mornings, planning our future and talking about the house we'd buy, was becoming distant in ways that made my chest tight with worry and my mind race with possibilities I didn't want to consider. During our 18-month engagement period, Megan's behavior shifted from subtle admiration to blatant prioritization of Brandon over our relationship, and I watched it happen with the methodical observation skills that served me well in my engineering work. Wedding planning, which should have been exciting for both of us, became a source of constant tension as Megan found excuses to skip our scheduled appointments that I'd carefully coordinated around both our work schedules. We'd book cake tastings weeks in advance, and she'd cancel last minute to attend Brandon's impromptu gallery showings of his outdoor photography, claiming it was essential networking for her career advancement in the creative marketing space. I'd sit alone with wedding vendors, making decisions about flowers, music, and menu options that should have been ours together, while she posted Instagram stories from art galleries with captions like, "Supporting real artists who capture authentic beauty," and "Finally found someone who understands creative vision." The irony wasn't lost on me that she had more enthusiasm for Brandon's amateur photography hobby than for planning our actual wedding. I discovered her late-night texting habits by accident when her phone lit up at 2 in the morning with Brandon's name, message after message that she'd quickly hide when I stirred in bed next to her. The frequency increased to the point where she'd be responding to him during our dinner conversations, laughing at his messages while barely acknowledging my attempts to discuss our upcoming venue walkthrough or catering decisions. The cryptic Instagram stories became more frequent and pointed, featuring sunset photos from locations I'd never visited with her, always tagged with philosophical captions like, "Some souls understand the art of living fully," or "Adventure calls to those brave enough to answer," or "Real connection transcends conventional boundaries." When I asked about these mysterious photo locations during breakfast one morning, she'd deflect with vague answers about exploring creative inspiration or expanding her artistic perspective for work projects, but could never explain how mountain photography related to marketing corporate services. My promotion to senior systems engineer required temporary weekend work on a major infrastructure project, something I explained thoroughly to Megan as a short-term sacrifice for our long-term financial stability and ability to afford the wedding she wanted. Instead of supporting this career advancement that would benefit our future together, she used my absence as an opportunity to join Brandon on photography expeditions to Blue Ridge Mountain locations that she'd never shown interest in during our 5 years together. I'd come home exhausted from 12-hour days installing complex electrical systems in industrial facilities, only to find her packed and ready for another adventure weekend. With Brandon, her excitement palpable in ways it never was for our quiet evenings together. The photos she posted from these trips made my stomach churn with their intimate implications, silhouettes of two figures watching sunsets, hands almost touching as they pointed at mountain vistas, compositions that looked deliberately romantic despite her claims of innocent friendship and professional networking. Comments from her friends started appearing that made the situation even more obvious. Things like, "You two look so natural together," and "Brandon brings out such a different side of you," which she'd heart and respond to enthusiastically. The most painful discovery was her engagement ring, which she'd started leaving behind during these outdoor adventures, claiming it got in the way of rock climbing and nature photography equipment. I found it sitting on our bathroom counter one Sunday morning, while she was already gone on another expedition I'd learned about through social media rather than direct communication from my own fiancé. When I confronted her about the ring, she became defensive and accused me of being possessive and controlling, saying that real relationships were built on trust, not jewelry requirements or material symbols of ownership. "Brandon thinks engagement rings are just materialistic symbols anyway," she said, not realizing how that statement revealed everything about their growing emotional intimacy and how much his opinions had started influencing her worldview. The emotional withdrawal became undeniable when she stopped participating in the physical affection that had always been natural between us, claiming she was stressed about work and wedding planning, yet she seemed energized and glowing every time she returned from time spent with Brandon, like someone who'd found exactly what they'd been missing. 8 weeks before our planned wedding at a historic plantation venue that I'd booked 18 months in advance, Megan orchestrated what she probably thought would be a gentle breakup dinner, complete with my favorite beef stroganoff that she'd spent the afternoon preparing while I finished troubleshooting a complex power grid issue at work. I should have known something was wrong when I came home to find candles lit and her wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, looking nervous in a way that had nothing to do with romance. We ate in relative silence, her pushing food around her plate while I tried to make conversation about the final wedding details that still needed confirmation. "The venue coordinator called today about the lighting setup," I said, cutting into the tender beef. "She wants to do a walkthrough next week to finalize the electrical requirements for the string lights you wanted." Megan set down her fork and looked at me with tears already forming in her eyes. "Keith, we need to talk about something important before we go any further with these plans." My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "What's on your mind?" She took a shaky breath and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed confession that hit me like a physical blow. "I've developed feelings for Brandon over the past year, deep feelings that I can't ignore anymore," she said, tears streaming down her face as she detailed how their relationship had evolved from emotional intimacy to something physical during their mountain photography trips. "It started as friendship, but somewhere along the way, it became something more meaningful than I ever expected." I set down my own fork, my appetite completely gone as she continued. "You represent security and stability, Keith, and I've always appreciated that about you. But Brandon offers passion and artistic inspiration that makes me feel authentically alive for the first time in years. The clinical way she described our relationship versus her feelings for Brandon made it clear this wasn't a recent development but something she'd been analyzing and justifying for months. She detailed their secret weekend getaways that she disguised as work conferences, how they'd share hotel rooms while I thought she was networking with potential clients, how Brandon had been encouraging her to leave me for months, calling our relationship comfortable but passionless, and insisting she deserved someone who matched her supposed creative spirit. "He understands parts of me that I didn't even know existed," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand in a gesture that felt more like pity than affection. "Brandon sees my potential for adventure and growth, while you see someone who needs to be taken care of and provided for." The accusation stung because it revealed how she'd reframed my love and support as something patronizing rather than generous. "We've been planning this conversation for weeks," she continued, not realizing how that statement made everything worse. "Brandon thinks it's cruel to keep pretending when we both know I belong with someone who shares my passion for living fully and embracing uncertainty." I watched her face as she spoke, seeing a stranger who'd been hiding behind the mask of my fiancé for months, someone who'd been emotionally checked out of our relationship while still accepting my financial support and wedding planning efforts. When she finished her confession, she had the audacity to suggest that I could easily afford the cancellation fees, since I was always so practical with money, as if my financial stability was a character flaw rather than something that had benefited her consistently throughout our relationship. "I've already packed most of my things," she said, gesturing toward the bedroom where I later discovered she'd been systematically removing her belongings for days. "Brandon has space for me at his warehouse loft, and we think it's better if I move out immediately so we can all start healing and moving forward." The presumption that this betrayal was somehow mutual, that we were all victims of circumstances rather than her deliberate choices, showed a level of self-deception that left me speechless. "I know this hurts now," she concluded, "but someday you'll understand that this is better for everyone involved, especially you, because you deserve someone who can love you the way you need to be loved." I sat there for a long moment, processing everything she'd said while she waited for my reaction, probably expecting tears or anger or desperate pleas for her to reconsider. Instead, I felt this strange calm settle over me, the same methodical focus I used when analyzing complex electrical problems at work. "Okay," I said simply, standing up and clearing my plate. "If that's what you want, then that's what you should do." Her face shifted from nervous anticipation to confusion, like she'd prepared for every reaction except acceptance. I spent the next 3 days executing the most organized breakup in history, treating it like any other project that required systematic attention to detail. I called every wedding vendor personally, explaining that the event was canceled due to circumstances beyond our control, absorbing $12,000 in lost deposits without complaint or drama because arguing wouldn't change the contracts I'd signed. The florist was understanding, the caterer less so, but I handled each conversation professionally, even asking if they could recommend other couples who might need last-minute services. I arranged for our apartment lease to transfer solely to Megan's name, since she'd need somewhere to land when Brandon's warehouse loft inevitably proved inadequate for her lifestyle expectations. I packed only my essential belongings, leaving behind furniture we'd bought together and kitchen appliances I'd chosen carefully, taking just my clothes, electronics, and the engineering textbooks that had always been mine anyway. The methodical process felt therapeutic, like debugging a system by removing all the corrupted components. I executed a complete social media blackout by blocking both Megan and Brandon across all platforms, not out of anger but to avoid the inevitable public display of their new relationship that I had no interest in witnessing. When concerned mutual friends started calling for explanations about the wedding cancellation, I told them simply to ask Megan and Brandon directly about what happened, forcing them to own their narrative instead of letting me be the bitter ex who spread rumors. The mysterious nature of my response created exactly the kind of vacuum I intended, making their relationship the center of uncomfortable attention without me having to say a word. I moved into a modern downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and an updated electrical system that I'd been admiring for months, finally able to afford the rent without supporting someone else's expensive tastes. Instead of wallowing in self-pity or anger, I immediately enrolled in advanced electrical engineering courses that would qualify me for project management positions, something I'd been postponing because Megan always had some crisis that required my financial attention. I joined a competitive cycling team that met for early morning rides through the city, discovering that I actually enjoyed pushing myself physically when I wasn't exhausted from emotional manipulation. The therapist I started seeing helped me recognize patterns in the relationship that I'd normalized, like how Megan had consistently prioritized her wants over our shared goals while making me feel guilty for having practical concerns about our future. "You removed yourself from a situation where you weren't valued," Dr. Rodriguez told me during our third session. "That's not abandonment, that's self-respect." My mysterious disappearance from their social circle created exactly the effect I'd hoped for, forcing Megan and Brandon to face questions about their relationship without me present to deflect attention or provide emotional drama. Mutual friends started noticing things they'd previously ignored, like how Megan had been emotionally checked out of our relationship for months while still enjoying the benefits of my support. The clean break I'd executed made it impossible for anyone to paint me as the villain or the victim, just someone who'd made a rational decision and moved forward with dignity. Within a month, I was sleeping better than I had in years, no longer lying awake wondering why my fiancé seemed more excited about someone else's adventures than our shared future together. Within 4 months of Megan moving into Brandon's converted warehouse loft, his true character began surfacing in ways that shattered every romantic fantasy she'd built around their relationship. The reality of Brandon's freelance photography income proved woefully insufficient to support the lifestyle expectations that Megan had developed during our 5 years together, when I'd been covering her rent, car payments, and expensive taste in organic groceries without complaint. Instead of the artistic partnership she'd envisioned, Brandon immediately pressured her to quit job searching and help him book wedding photography gigs, making unrealistic income projections that never materialized because his portfolio consisted mainly of amateur mountain landscapes rather than professional event photography. "We could make 6 figures if you handle the marketing side," he told her, according to mutual friends who still occasionally updated me on their situation. The warehouse loft that had seemed bohemian and artistic during their secret romantic weekends revealed itself as a chronically cold, poorly maintained space in an unsafe neighborhood where Megan felt trapped without reliable transportation. Her BMW had been repossessed within 2 months when she couldn't make payments on her marketing salary alone, leaving her dependent on Brandon's unreliable motorcycle for transportation to job interviews and basic errands. The adventurous spirit that Megan had found so attractive began manifesting as pure irresponsibility that affected every aspect of their daily life. Brandon would disappear for days on photography assignments without clear communication about when he'd return, leaving Megan isolated in the warehouse with no car, limited groceries, and growing anxiety about their financial situation. She'd call friends frantically when he'd been gone for 3 days chasing the perfect sunrise shot in some remote location, admitting that the spontaneity she'd once found exciting now felt like abandonment and neglect. The romantic mountain getaways became working trips where she carried equipment while he focused entirely on getting shots for his Instagram, treating her more like an unpaid assistant than a beloved partner. "He doesn't plan anything," she complained to her sister, who later shared this with mutual friends. "We'll be in the middle of nowhere with no food, no cell service, and no backup plan because Brandon thinks planning ruins the authentic experience." The relationship turned genuinely toxic when Brandon began openly flirting with his photography models, young women who hired him for outdoor portrait sessions that often stretched into overnight camping trips that Megan wasn't invited to join. His justification was always artistic integrity and creative freedom, claiming that jealousy was a bourgeois emotion that prevented true artists from reaching their potential. He started having multiple affairs, including one particularly devastating betrayal with a bride whose wedding he'd been hired to photograph, bringing the woman back to their warehouse loft while Megan was visiting her mother for the weekend. When Megan confronted him about the affair after finding evidence on his camera equipment, Brandon became emotionally manipulative in ways that made my practical approach to problem-solving seem gentle by comparison. "You're becoming as clingy and boring as Keith," he told her during their fight, according to what she later shared during her desperate attempts to reconnect with me. I thought you understood that real love doesn't come with possessive demands and bourgeois expectations about monogamy. He threatened to kick her out of the warehouse if she couldn't handle his artistic freedom, knowing she had nowhere else to go and no reliable income to support herself independently. The psychological manipulation escalated when he started comparing her unfavorably to other women, telling her she'd gained weight and lost the spontaneous energy that had attracted him initially, suggesting that her complaints about his behavior proved she wasn't evolved enough for their unconventional relationship. Maybe you're just not cut out for this lifestyle, he'd say when she expressed basic needs for security or communication. Keith probably would take you back if you apologized properly and promised to be more grateful for what you had. The irony of Brandon using me as a threat to keep Megan compliant wasn't lost on anyone who knew the situation, but by then she was too emotionally broken and financially desperate to see the manipulation clearly. After Brandon abandoned her following a particularly volatile fight about his latest affair with a yoga instructor whose Instagram portfolio he'd been hired to shoot, Megan launched an increasingly frantic campaign to reconnect with me that revealed the depth of her desperation and complete lack of self-awareness about what she'd done. The first contact came through carefully crafted text messages that started arriving at my office number, which she'd somehow obtained from old paperwork, beginning with seemingly casual inquiries about my well-being that quickly escalated into detailed confessions about her mistakes. "Keith, I know I don't deserve your attention, but I need you to know that Brandon was emotionally manipulative from the beginning," she wrote in one 3-paragraph message. "He isolated me from my friends and made me question my own judgment about what love should look like, and I realize now how stable and caring you always were." The messages emphasized my positive qualities while portraying herself as a victim of Brandon's psychological manipulation rather than someone who had made deliberate choices to betray our relationship and abandon our shared future. When I didn't respond to her text messages after 2 weeks of increasingly desperate attempts, she escalated to leaving voicemails on my home phone that detailed her financial struggles, homelessness, and complete isolation from former friends who had judged her harshly for the affair. "I'm staying in my car some nights because I can't afford rent anywhere," she said in one particularly pathetic recording. "Brandon took all the money we made from the few photography gigs we booked together, and now I can't even afford groceries or gas to get to job interviews." The voicemails revealed that her entire support system had collapsed, partly because she'd burned bridges with friends who'd tried to warn her about Brandon's reputation, and partly because she'd become so financially dependent that she had no resources to rebuild independently. Her family joined the pressure campaign when her individual efforts failed to generate any response from me, with her mother and sister calling my workplace repeatedly and even showing up at my downtown condo building to plead Megan's case with increasingly aggressive tactics. "Real men forgive the woman they love," her mother declared when she cornered me in the lobby one evening, clearly having waited for hours. "Megan made a mistake, but she's learned from it, and you have a moral obligation to help someone you once cared about enough to propose to." Her sister was more direct, telling me that Megan was having panic attacks and couldn't sleep, suggesting that my refusal to respond was cruel and vindictive rather than a reasonable boundary after being betrayed and humiliated. The family pressure revealed how completely they misunderstood the situation, treating Megan's choices as a temporary lapse in judgment rather than a deliberate betrayal that had lasted months and involved extensive planning and deception. The attempts became increasingly desperate and invasive as weeks passed without any acknowledgement from me, including Megan creating fake social media accounts to monitor my cycling team activities and professional accomplishments that she'd gleaned from LinkedIn updates. She sent expensive gifts to my office with handwritten notes begging for just one conversation to explain everything and ask for your forgiveness, apparently using credit cards to fund these gestures despite claiming to be financially destitute. The gifts included a high-end cycling computer that cost several $100s, accompanied by a note saying, "I remember how much you wanted this for your training, and I wanted to show you that I still pay attention to what makes you happy." The manipulative nature of using my own interests against me while claiming financial hardship showed that she hadn't learned anything meaningful from her experience with Brandon. The most disturbing escalation was when she started appearing at locations where my cycling team trained, watching from a distance and trying to approach me after rides when I was tired and potentially more vulnerable to emotional appeals. "I know you see me here," she said during one encounter in the parking lot of our usual coffee stop. I'm not going to give up until you understand how sorry I am and how much I've changed since Brandon showed me what emotional abuse actually looks like. Her refusal to accept my silence as an answer, combined with her portrayal of herself as a fellow victim rather than someone who had made calculated choices, demonstrated that her desperation was entirely self-serving rather than genuinely remorseful. The climactic encounter occurred at our mutual friend David's wedding at a lakeside resort 18 months after Megan had walked out of my life, and I appeared as the confident, visibly thriving man I'd become through deliberate personal growth and therapy. I'd been invited as David's college roommate, while Megan attended as someone's last-minute guest, looking worn down and desperate in a way that made several people ask if she was feeling well. She spotted me during the cocktail reception and immediately cornered me near the bar, her approach so direct that other guests noticed and gave us space, probably expecting drama. "Keith, thank God you're here," she said, tears already forming as she launched into her final plea without any preamble or small talk. "I've been trying to reach you for months because I need you to understand what really happened with Brandon and how completely he manipulated me into thinking our relationship was holding me back." Her opening gambit combined fake tears with genuine desperation as she detailed her current nightmare situation, living with her mother again and working retail for minimum wage while struggling to rebuild her life from nothing. "Brandon destroyed everything good in my life, and I realize now that you were the only person who ever truly loved me for who I was," she continued, reaching for my arm in a gesture that felt calculated rather than spontaneous. "I was young and stupid and completely taken in by his lies about adventure and authenticity, but you were building something real with someone who didn't deserve your dedication." The manipulative nature of her approach became obvious when she tried to make me feel guilty for abandoning her during her darkest hour, suggesting that a truly good man would have fought harder to save her from Brandon's influence. "You just disappeared when I needed someone to show me what real love looked like," she said, her voice breaking in what seemed like practiced emotion. "If you had tried harder to win me back, maybe I would have realized my mistake before Brandon could hurt me so completely." When I remained calm and simply listened without responding emotionally, she became angry and accused me of being heartless for watching her suffer without offering help or forgiveness. "This isn't the Keith I fell in love with," she said, her tears turning to frustration when manipulation failed to generate the response she wanted. "The man I knew would never punish someone he claimed to love just because they made a mistake." My response was calm, direct, and final, delivered in the same steady tone I used for professional presentations. "Megan, you didn't make a mistake," I said, looking directly into her eyes so she couldn't misinterpret my meaning. "You made a series of deliberate choices over several months that showed me exactly who you are and what you value. I've built a fulfilling life without drama or manipulation, and I'm not interested in going backward." Her face went through shock, anger, and finally desperation as she realized that her last card had been played and rejected. "You're really going to throw away everything we had over one bad decision?" she asked, her voice rising enough that other guests started looking in our direction. "We had 5 years together, Keith. That has to mean something." I simply walked away without another word, rejoining friends who had witnessed my transformation from betrayed fiancé to self-assured man who refused to be manipulated by someone who had already proven her character through actions rather than words.